Hello, I'm Jim from Louisville, Kentucky, and I like to listen to Scandal Water while I'm sitting on my back porch with a great cup of coffee.
Welcome to Scandal Water, where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1. Stories in Scandal Water, it's where you need to be. Stories in Scandal Water, let's pour you a cup of tea.
Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning.
It is a beautiful day
It is.
to be talking about a tough subject.
Ooh, yes. A little touchy.
You know what? Here we are, guys. Off mic, I'm going to confess to you. Ashley and I were discussing the fact that we're in the middle of this theme. Breaking up is hard to do. And what news comes out this morning?
Big breakup.
Big breakup. J-Lo and Ben Affleck.
Benifer is no more of her.
And did you note the significance of the date?
Is it like 2 years after they got married?
This is the date of their 2-year. Yeah, they had a ceremony. They got married in July.
In
but
Vegas.
then yes, but then in
Man, that's personal. If she filed on their anniversary,
the
that's
Georgia wedding date when their family was there.
That's real personal.
Yeah, seems like it. Sad for them. I'm sure this is a difficult time, but at the same time, this just fits so naturally with what we're talking about.
It's like, are we sort of like influencing this stuff? Sorry, guys.
They made me think a little bit of the Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton
I did
situation.
too. I thought about that. I thought, well, are they going to try again? Is it
Right.
just something where they just can't be married?
Right. Is that flame that burns for each other? Does it just flame a little too hot
I have no
sometimes?
idea.
I don't know. But anyway, they are no more, which is sad. But nice lead in for our final episode with the theme of breaking up is hard to do. But I will tell you, since this was the final episode, I took a little bit of a different angle.
Ooh.
Yeah, this is not going to be the traditional episode that you have been used to earlier this month. We're actually going to talk about 2 different situations, one prior to the break, one after. And this first one is not a romantic breakup.
Oh.
Yeah. So here you go. I'm going to ask you a quick question. Tell me some famous brother acts that you can think of.
The first one I'm going to say, I think is the one you're going to do because I look at them every time we record. Turn around and look right there.
Oh, yes.
It's the Everly Brothers.
And that is who we're going to do. Yeah.
So funny. Brothers. Famous brother
I'll get you
acts.
Okay.
Okay.
Bee Gees.
Oh, yeah. The brothers Gibb.
I don't know that they act together all the time, but they've done a few movies together.
The Wilson boys.
Yes, absolutely. And Casey and Ben Affleck.
Oh, yeah. Who we were just talking about.
Exactly. When you think of these relationships, these partnerships that are connected not only through your goals professionally, through your career, but also through your bloodline.
Yeah.
It's a whole different angle, right? So it was really interesting. When I was Googling, looking for some ideas of topics that would be great to cover for this month, time and time again, when I would search messy breakups or ugly breakups, the Everly Brothers would appear.
I
was
did not know they broke up.
Well, I mean, and probably it's because they did get back together, spoiler alert. But they came up in so many different articles that I thought, you know what? I want to know myself now. So this is what we're going to talk about before the break. We're going to look at this breakup of the Everly Brothers.
I really like their music.
I do too. They are so good. Their harmonies, unbelievable. Unbelievable. But I thought I would start with a few fast facts, as I sometimes do. Did you know that there are statues of the Everly Brothers in Central City, Kentucky, which is in
No.
Muhlenberg County? Yeah,
Are they from Kentucky?
they are.
Oh.
But I mean, they're from a lot of places,
Yeah.
to be quite honest. But here's the thing. Don Everly was born on the outskirts of the town. Now, by the time his younger brother came along, they were in Chicago, but they still consider Central City to be their hometown because their family is there.
Okay.
Their dad, Ike, spent a lot of time there mining coal. He was known to be one of the best guitar pickers in the area. And because because their grandparents were still there. The boys would visit Kentucky as they were growing up, usually at least once a year. And so back in the 80s, when they heard the town was hurting economically, they started organizing an annual music festival to benefit the community, which they did for something like 13 years. They would generally work with John Prine, who was another musician with roots in that area. And therefore, the three of them now have a statue there.
That's lovely. Good for them.
Right? Okay. Second, fast fact, the song Wake Up Little Susie was banned from Boston radio stations in 1957 because the lyrics were considered too suggestive.
Ooh.
Number 3, the brothers spent a 6-month stint as Marines in the Marine Corps Reserves from the latter part of 1961 through the beginning of 1962 in order to fulfill their military obligation and avoid being drafted for 2 full years in the Army. That came, by the way, from the Everly Brothers International site.
Nice.
Number 4, the Everly Brothers were among the first 10 artists inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986.
That is cool. Good for them.
I thought you would ask. So
Who else?
the other 9 inductees were Chuck Berry, James Brown, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Fats Domino, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley.
What a great lineup.
Right? The very first group, like that was it.
They said, what 10 can we honor? That's a good 10 to pick.
Isn't that amazing?
It is.
And the final fast fact. In 2003, Simon and Garfunkel went on an old friends tour, that's what they called it, and midway through their show, they would bring up the Everly Brothers, who Paul would generally introduce by saying he considered them his heroes. And the Everly Brothers would get to sing several of their hits before Simon and Garfunkel would then join them to sing Bye Bye Love.
That's another couple that broke up. That was pretty nasty.
Yeah, they came up a lot too.
Oh, yeah.
I had to debate between them. I thought that was fascinating.
It is.
I'm going to give you a little background on these brothers so that it's going to make more sense when we talk about...
Yeah, I really don't know a lot about them other than I really like their music. So
Yeah, well...
I'm a blank page.
All right. You're going to find this interesting too. So as we said, Don was born in Kentucky in 1937, but by the time Phil was born in 1939, the family had moved to Illinois. Now, the reason behind moving to Illinois and then later to Iowa and Tennessee, these people moved around a lot, but it was because their parents, Ike and Margaret Everly, were both country musicians who wanted to pursue their dream of being performers.
Oh.
Ike was a very talented guitarist, as I've already said. He played guitar for the family's traveling act. And this meant that the brothers started singing together from a very early age, and they also both became accomplished guitarists themselves over time. The family performed on radio in addition to traveling, and in fact, they had their own radio program for a while. I found a YouTube clip in which I heard Don and Phil performing on a country radio station when they were 9 and 7 years old. Adorable.
That's sweet.
But they were so confident to be doing that at such a young age. You
Well,
could
they've been
tell.
doing it a while.
Right. They were meant to be performers. This family, I have a picture of them. The family and their traveling act. Adorable. But along the way, the brothers started singing more as a duo, and that's where they developed those incredible harmonies for which they are so famous. They also caught the attention of some very important people in the music business. For example, the legendary Nashville guitarist Chet Atkins was reportedly one of their earliest supporters.
Cool.
Yeah.
I wonder if their parents got jealous because the boys went on and became famous, or if they were cool with it.
You know, I never saw anything about that, but it seemed to me as though this was part of their dream. Like seeing their boys rise to fame. Yeah.
It was good.
Yes. So Phil and Don were only 18 and 20 when they had their breakthrough hit, Bye Bye Love, in 1957. It made it all the way to number 2 in the U.S. charts, and it was also the first of several songs that the brothers sang that were composed by this fella named Boudleaux Bryant and his wife Felice. Now, I bring this up because this is actually going to come back later. The music that this couple composed for them, big. It brought them a lot of hits. And so I wanted to kind of make a point of that. Although I should clarify that the brothers also did write some of their own music as well. Okay. So I've already said that Wake Up Little Susie was their first number 1 hit. Just a reminder, it was a song about 2 teenagers who fall asleep at the drive-in theater and they wake up long after their curfew. And that is why it was banned in Boston, because it seemed too suggestive.
But they're clear about it. They fell asleep. That's the point of the song.
Right. They even say our reputation is shot.
Yep.
Yes. But over the next few years, the brothers brothers had hit after hit. Do you want to name a few of the songs that you remember?
Oh, golly. Now that you've asked me, I won't be able to say it. But Bye Bye Love, the Wake Up Little Susie.
All I Have to Do Is Dream.
Oh, I was actually singing that this morning.
Really?
I was. Yes, I was singing it while I was vacuuming. Dream, dream, dream. I was doing that. Yeah, I don't know. I just like their music.
Till I Kissed Her, Kathy's Clown.
Kathy's Clown. There she goes. That's Kathy's Clown.
That was a big one for them. Let It Be Me was another one.
I like that one too.
Yeah. They were on top of the world after a while. In fact, according to Phil's son, who spoke in a 2023 CBS Sunday Morning interview, back in 1960, Warner Brothers signed the Everly Brothers to the biggest recording contract in music history at that time, $1 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, so they were big. In terms
What
of
year was it?
1960.
Interesting.
Yeah. According to an NPR article, quote, their webpage on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame catalog of inductees rightly notes that the brothers, quote, transformed the Appalachian folk, bluegrass, and country sounds of their Kentucky boyhood into a richly harmonized form of rock and roll. With Don taking the melody and Phil harmonizing above him, the Everlys released a steady string of hit records between 1957 and 1962 that crossed over from country to pop and even R&B charts. So this is what they are given credit for doing,
Really
for
revitalizing.
accomplishing. Yes, absolutely. I don't think we can overstate how popular they were. I did not realize. I mean, I knew I'd always heard of them, but as I was doing this research, they have been given so much credit for influencing other performers, for basically getting rock and roll as a genre started. They are referred to so many times as rock and roll pioneers.
Wow.
So that same CBS Sunday Morning interview that I've already mentioned touches briefly on this point. I'm going to play just a few seconds of this. First, you're going to hear a narrator talking, and then you're going to hear famous singer Tom Petty say a few words, and then finally, Phil's son.
Okay.
In 1986, when the brothers got their star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame, Tom Petty was there.
So many people are credited with influencing the rock era, but these guys really did. More so than anyone I can think of, just about.
When they went into the studio to record, say, Bye Bye Love, it started out country, and it came out a rock and roll classic, and it blew everybody's mind.
So I think they just reiterated what we'd already said. That is Tom Petty saying
That's
he
amazing.
can't think of any other group or any other artist that influenced rock and roll more than they did.
That is amazing considering that there was Elvis around the same time.
Exactly. I don't think I understood. I don't think I understood just how big they were, how influential they were. So here they are, riding high, so successful, influencing other people, height of their popularity, and then things started to go south a little bit. Their popularity started to decline, and there were a number of factors behind this. I'm going to quickly mention them. First, as we said in the Fast Facts section, the brothers had to leave music for a while, leave their touring to go into the Marines.
Right.
So that took them out of, the pop culture there for a while, out of the public eye. This is also the time period when the British invasion and the Beatles are coming.
Yes, that was huge.
Yes, and music styles are changing, they're evolving, even though the Beatles said the Everly Brothers were a huge influence on them.
Probably with their early stuff, yes.
Yeah. Another factor mentioned in a few different sources was, I'm going back to that point I made earlier, the brothers lost access to songs written by that couple, the Bryants, who had supplied them with many of their early hit songs. I'm not going to go into all this, but basically there was some type of a falling out the brothers had with a manager, and this somehow led to them losing access to this music. Yes. Then the stress from all of this
Fame
and fortune and the Marines was taking its toll, especially on Don. Different sources quoted Don from an interview he gave in 1986 to Rolling Stone, where he spoke openly about having some really strong issues with substances. He explained that he started what was referred to as Ritalin therapy. That's what they called it back then. It was a controversial treatment method that involved mixing an amphetamine-like stimulant and vitamins. Don told Rolling Stone that it seemed like a really safe thing to do. This is what they believed
Early
at the
days,
time, right?
early
Early days. His doctor said, "Oh, this is, this is what people are doing. John F. Kennedy's doing this." So they put the president's name in front of him. In fact, Don told Rolling Stone, quote, "People didn't understand drugs that well then. They They didn't know what they were messing with. It wasn't against the law. I saw a picture of my doctor with the president, you know? But it got out of hand naturally. It was a real disaster for a lot of people, and it was a disaster for me. A Seattle Times article written at the time of Don's death shared that Don was in such a bad place when all this was happening that he intentionally tried to overdose twice during an English tour in 1962. And then when they returned stateside, he had a bit of a breakdown. At some point, he even underwent electroshock therapy, which he would later say blocked his ability to write songs for several years. Like, he was struggling, struggling. Now, I will say, different sources mentioned that Don also had problems with alcohol, so that might have contributed.
Yeah.
And some sources mentioned that Phil may have had some problems with substance use issues as well, but I couldn't confirm that, and it didn't seem like it was an ongoing thing with him, like it appeared to be for Don, if it happened. Now, what they did talk about with Phil a lot was that he was a very, very heavy smoker, and they do think that contributed to his death. He developed COPD later in life and really struggled with breathing. But all of this to say, despite their dwindling sales and now some growing tension between the brothers, they kept touring. Let's clarify. As things are going on, they are having some resentment. There's sibling rivalry. Sometimes you would see things about them taking credit, the songs that they did write. One of them might start it, one might end it, and then there would be some kind of
who did it?
who actually wrote this. Just different things going on. But they kept touring. According to the Seattle Times, however, they would endure long periods when they sang together, but wouldn't talk to each other.
Oh, gosh.
And supposedly, Phil said in 1970, kind of like he's joking, quote, "We only ever had one argument. It's been lasting for 25 years.
Oh, no.
And then everything came to a head in mid-July of 1973 at Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California. It's another one of those instances. I've seen conflicting information in several sources. Here are the details that seem to be most consistent. Okay? So reportedly, Don had told Phil that they needed to take a break. They needed to end their partnership, have some time apart, and so they both were going into this Knott's Berry Farm gig knowing that this is
a break.
We're last gig.
Okay.
Maybe for a long time.
Okay.
But Don told Rolling Stone, "I was half in the bag that evening. The only time I've ever been drunk on stage in my life. I knew it was the last night, and on the way out, I drank some tequila, drank some champagne, started celebrating the demise. It was really a funeral." Phil was furious that his brother was drunk on stage. He was messing up the lyrics. Here they are performing. Phil is so angry that he finally's had enough. He smashes his guitar on stage and storms off, leaving Dawn alone to finish the set.
Oh, my goodness.
And supposedly, after Phil stormed off the stage, Dawn told the crowd, "The Everly Brothers died 10 years ago."
Oh, no.
Now, in that same Rolling Stone interview I've mentioned several times, Dawn went on to say, quote, "People thought that night was just some brouhaha between Phil and me. They didn't realize we had been working our buns off for years. We had never been anywhere without working, had never known any freedom. We were just strapped together like a team of horses. It was one of the saddest days of my life."
That's awful.
For the next 10 years, the
They didn't
brothers,
talk.
they were basically estranged.
Yeah.
I think their dad passed during that time. And of course, they crossed paths at different times. But they were basically estranged and apart, both working on trying to get a solo career going.
But didn't happen.
It didn't really. I mean, they had some mild success, but nothing like when they were together. In an article that came out in 2014, right after Phil's death, we'll talk about how he died in a second, the writer noted that neither Everly brother was ever able to achieve the same amount of success with a solo career as when they were working as a duo. And in that same article, this musician named Tom Bard chimed in on that. He said that despite having very different personalities, Don and Phil were always lumped together. And he said, "No one wants one, Everly brother. That's sort of the heartbreaker for me. They were both incredibly talented, but people took them as a pair."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's in the name, Everly Brothers.
Yeah. After about a decade apart, they apparently realized they did need each other and they reunited. Phil said that they did it, they sealed it with a hug. And in 1983, they went on a successful nostalgia tour and continued to work together regularly over the next few decades, off and on. For example, that annual hometown fundraising event for Central City that I mentioned, that started in 1988 and ran every year for years. I think it was the early 2000s before that ended. And these brothers were so successful. They earned so many awards during their 5 decades together, including the one we've already mentioned, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recognition and a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1997. They were also inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2001. But Phil passed away in 2014 at the age of 74, which again was related to his smoking.
Young.
Yeah. And Don passed away in 2021 at the age of 84. But I thought I would end with a quote that Phil gave to Time magazine at one point when he was explaining about their relationship. Here's what he said. Don and I are infamous for our split, but we're closer than most brothers. Harmony singing requires that you enlarge yourself, not use any kind of suppression. Harmony is the ultimate love.
Oh, I like that. And they're not necessarily famous for their split. Who am I? But I didn't know they split. I just liked them, you know?
I had never heard of it before,
Yeah.
but it was interesting how it came up. And I can see where it is a little sensational when you have a brother
smashing
smash
a
his guitar and walking off stage and leaving
and the other
his
one's
sibling
drunk
alone.
on stage saying,
Right.
we died 10 years ago. That's a little dramatic.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So that's the breakup of the Everly Brothers, which then ended up in a reunion.
I like the happy ending of that one. Thank you very
Yes,
much. I can keep my
yes.
record and have happy mememories.
Yeah. Before we take our break, any final thoughts about the Everly Brothers situation?
It makes me sad because they said they felt like they were strapped together, almost like workhorses, and we don't know. I mean, obviously, we've said this over and over again. We're not in their family. We didn't grow up with them. We have no personal knowledge, but I wonder how much of the parents' dreams drove the kids. Like, was it a stage parents kind of thing where they forced them into this? And I don't know, just balance it with work and free time. It sounds like they just wanted to have some free time or have some time to themselves, but they were always like just forced to do this performing and forced to be together, and they needed to be able to choose. And then when they reunited, they chose to be together. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same thing we say so many times, that double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Had they not had each other,
Yeah.
they would have never achieved that
Obviously.
level of success and fame.
Right.
So there's so many positives these two men, I'm sure, were grateful for, that they had each other to thank for that. Their partnership was totally to thank for that. But at the same time, it sounded to me like it really became such a situation of, why are we always compared? Why are we always...
Why can't we be a team? Why do we have to be compared to each other?
Right. And if they had the sibling rivalry, they were
Yeah.
comparing themselves to each
Yes.
other.
Yes.
You know, I think there was just that kind of competitiveness. I heard several interviews they gave, and it was kind of interesting to me. I don't know if I was just reading this into it because of my research or if this was really happening, but it did seem like they would come in on each other a lot, or if one made a statement, the other might kind of correct
Adjust
or yes. And I was like, you know, is this normal, or am I seeing a little bit of competitiveness
Now that
just
I know
because,
it.
right. Regardless,
It had a happy ending.
it had a happy ending, and these were two men who achieved so much. With that, let's take a break, and we'll come back to talk about other breaks.
When it comes to breakups, you don't get much bigger than the sensational love triangle between Jennifer Aniston, Brad Pitt, and Angelina Jolie. For our minisode this month, listen in as Candy spills the tea on all the behind-the-scenes drama that led to one powerhouse couple's downfall and the rise and then fall of the new powerhouse couple, Brangelina.
Visit buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod and become a member to hear the tea on this notorious breakup, as well as all the other bonus content. Cheers! And we are back, and I'm excited about this because you don't know what's coming for this one.
I don't know.
Okay, we'll see if my opening question gives you any hints.
All right.
Tell me about some of the scariest stories or thrillers you've ever read.
You know, I I don't read those.
Ever?
I mean, I try to avoid them. So, okay, wait. The scariest stories or thrillers I've
It could be
ever read?
suspenseful. It doesn't have to be scary.
Suspenseful. The level of suspense I hit is Agatha Christie. So I am not in the Stephen King
Okay, that's okay.
wheelhouse.
Think along those lines then.
Stephen King?
Classic. Think of what are some scary stories you've read by classic authors.
I don't. I don't. You're going to have to give me a different hint.
So have you ever read by chance The Telltale Heart?
No. Ew. No.
Ew.
Well, no, it's so. Yes, I have read it, and I heard it in our theater did a radio play where we did the works of Edgar Allan Poe. Super cool guy. Real weird. I mean, he had a really interesting death that I, as a conspiracy lover, I was like, whoa, this is real interesting. You guys should dig into his passing. Loved The Pale Blue Eye on Netflix. That was cool, but that spooked me out. That stuff spooked me out. Listening to our radio play, and there was one about a cat, and I was like,
the black cat.
The black cat. This is horrifying.
This is so funny.
Yes.
Guess the topic.
Is it Edgar Allan Poe?
Yes!
Oh my god.
Okay, here's the fun thing. Here's the fun thing.
Who did he break up with?
Well, again, surprised. I'm just Googling, looking for topics, and I see that he had one interesting breakup. One, okay? And it wasn't that sensational. But I was like, you know what? This is interesting. And we are transitioning to October when we
true.
always like to do kind of a little bit of a
Little
darker,
spooky
it's a little eerier thing. So
Yeah.
I'm like, we're going to look at the loves and breakups of Edgar Allan Poe. Because
Didn't
there's
he,
so
like,
much
didn't
more
he
here
get
than you
engaged
knew.
to some ladies and they were like, no thanks?
Yes, you are correct.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So for those of you listening, Candy's wearing a Nate. How do you say his last name? Nate.
I think it's Bargatze, maybe?
Nate Bargassi. Nate, I'm gonna make eye contact with you several times when I need comfort while we're talking about
But you will be fine, because guess what?
What?
I do want to come back and talk about Edgar Allan Poe and his works and his mysterious death at some point, because there's a whole episode on that.
Yes, there is.
I am only focusing in on the women in his life. So
He's a
you're going to be
complex
fine.
dude.
You don't
All
even
right.
have to stare at Nate. You're going to be fine.
I may still do it, Nate.
Because this is fascinating.
It
Like
is.
once I started digging into it, there's the famous relationship everybody knows about Edgar Allan Poe.
With his cousin?
Yes.
Right. Look, here he is right here. Edgar.
Yes, but I don't think I knew about his other relationships, and I'm guessing you guys might be surprised at a couple of these too. I think you're going to have fun with it. But I will tell you, I enjoy Poe. I
Do you?
love
That's
Poe. Yes,
wonderful. He
I've
spooks me.
taught him before, and Kirk and I had the coolest experience. We went to visit Monticello a few years ago, and we ended up staying at a hotel nearby. Turns out that also ended up being near the University of Virginia.
Oh, where
so
he
one
went.
morning, yes, we were like, you know what? We'll take our walk. We'll just walk around the campus. We'll get some coffee. We ended up by chance walking through this little kind of it was very cool. It was like kind of an outside dorm area. Like the rooms opened and looked onto this kind of court, if you will.
Cool.
And one of the rooms has a historical marker that says Edgar Allan Poe stayed in this room.
Do they have the furniture?
Well, it's not authentic to him, but it's
okay.
what the room would have looked like. And I
Cool.
think they even put like a stuffed raven or something in there. I took a picture.
Okay.
I will put it in our show notes.
Okay.
I was tickled to death. I mean, to me, it was like, look, we're standing here where Edgar Allan Poe stayed.
Oh, I think he's fascinating. He just scares me. His stuff just scares me. I have a very low threshold, guys.
Yeah. Well, I will say, after doing this research, I have a little bit of a different understanding of the man, because one of the things that I was able to watch was a PBS American Masters documentary called Edgar Allan Poe Buried Alive. But the buried alive part is talking about how his identity, like his actual identity, got buried alive a bit by people who
Interesting.
wrote about him after his death.
Okay.
It was a little bit of that whole Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story kind of thing. And so it was fascinating. He was not all about the horror. He had other
good.
sides of him as well. And I
need
don't
to
know
read
that we
those.
always know this. So, all right, here we go. Full disclosure, I'm going to make myself stay focused on these women, and we're going to avoid some of these other topics that I really, really want to talk about.
But
So-
let's commit to saying we're going to do an Edgar Allan Poe episode.
Yes.
At some point.
Let's do it.
With
Okay.
no time limit.
So here we are, Edgar and his loves.
Okay.
Not always just romantic loves. We're
Okay.
going to focus on Edgar and the important women in his life.
All right.
Okay. Starting with his mother.
I was going to say, number one has to be mom.
Yeah. So Edgar was born in 1809 to a lovely and very successful actress called Eliza Poe, short for Elizabeth. She was an American theater star, especially talented when it came to musicals and comedies. In fact, the documentary said her singing voice was so beautiful that she was often referred to simply as the Nightingale.
Oh.
Now, when he was born, Edgar already had an older brother, Henry, and then by the time his younger sister, Rosalie, was born in 1810, Father David Poe, also an actor, had already abandoned the family. Although it was never officially confirmed, the popular belief was that a different man had fathered Rosalie, and that is why David had left Eliza. And certain things have happened. I won't go into it right now, but that it seems like it might have been true. I'll tell you one example. This is jumping in the timeline. But years later, in a letter that Edgar's foster father wrote to his brother Henry, he referred to Rosalie as your half-sister.
Oh.
So there are certain things that make it seem like it could be true.
Okay.
But back to the point in our story where we are. Edgar's just a child. Eliza is now on her own. She stays with the theater. She's trying to support 3 kids by
That's
herself.
a lot.
And she becomes very, very ill with tuberculosis. So she dies of tuberculosis in December of 1811. She is only 24 years old. Edgar is only 2, so he never really knew her. And just to kind of drive this point home, this is something that people believe affected him greatly. In fact, they will say that the search for love and the loss of the women he loved was a huge theme for the entirety of his career, his, all the work he did, and also just his personal life. One of the biographers in that same documentary was quoted as saying, throughout his life, he was always searching for unequivocal love. And he himself at one point wrote, "The death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world." This is what confirmed to me we need to talk about the women.
Okay.
So Eliza's gone, and what does she do before she passes? She had traveled to Richmond with her theater group at the point where she became so ill she could not go on, and these women of Richmond were helping to take care of her as she was passing. And I'm assuming they helped her get this ad in the paper that basically said,
I need a mother.
I need some people to help take care of my children. And so what ends up happening is Henry goes to live with his grandparents on his dad's side in Baltimore, while Rosalie and Edgar are taken in by different families in the Richmond area. So one of the women who had helped take care of Eliza when she was dying is now Edgar's foster mother.
Wow.
Yeah, he was taken in by this wealthy childless couple, John and Frances Allen. Frances had been an orphan herself, and she adored Edgar, and he adored her, but things were not so great with John Allen. And now, when he was younger, it sounded like they got along pretty well when he was like a little kid, but as he started to turn into a teenager and then a man, it sounded like it just got worse and worse, increasingly tense and contentious until it really got ugly. More about that later. But here's the thing. As he's growing up, John is not supporting his love of poetry or his love of literature, but Edgar found a supporter in the mother of his good friend from school, Robert Stannard. Jane Stith Stannard was her name, and while she was encouraging Edward with his poetry and his writing, she became not only something of a mother figure to Edgar, he actually developed a pretty big crush on her.
Oh.
So he was devastated when she died of an unknown mental illness when he was only 15 years old. It said in the documentary that he would often visit her grave, and years later he wrote the poem To Helen as a tribute to her. So she comes up a lot, Jane Stannard. Around the time he's 16, he starts a romance with a girl named Elmira Royster, who was approximately a year younger. Some sources said they were actually engaged, but when he went to the university, Dad was not a fan. Sounded like Dad intervened and
Broke them up.
Yes, broke them up. She's now out of the picture. By the way, Edgar only got to stay at the University of Virginia for 1 semester. And here's the thing. Here's the reason. This is from his telling. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a lot of letters over the years, and they have a lot of his letters. So some of this is straight from letters. But his version was that his dad, his foster father, let me clarify that, had given him enough to get to college, but not enough to pay everything he needed to live there. And so from his version of the situation. He started gambling because he had to pay his debts, drove up this really huge bill. John Allan is furious. He wasn't going to pay it. So Edgar ends up not only having to leave the university, but he's also now got debt to pay. Well, he ends up going into the military. But here's what happens, though, in the meantime, talking about these women. Just a few years after Jane had passed, Frances Allan passed away of an unknown illness. It was in 1829.
That's his foster mother.
His foster mother. So by the time he was 20 years old, he had lost 3 mother figures.
Man.
Now, something they brought out that I thought was interesting, they said during this time period, the mortality rate was more than 3 times what it is today. And they said TB and childbirth were 2 huge causes of death. So that was another point they made. You know, it seemed like he was obsessed with death. Well, it was his life.
Yeah.
Like it was a life of a lot of people. So just a little side note there. But he's now on the outs with John. John's not helping him, which is also a bit of a surprise because remember, he's grown up in this wealthy family. Yeah. He's probably thinking he's going to be fine. Yeah. And now he's in debt and his father's not helping him. So he goes into the army for 2 years where he supposedly did pretty well. Mm-hmm. And in fact, he decided, I'm pretty good at this. I'm going to go to West Point. He couldn't get in. So John Allan, he was moved to step in and use his influence.
Pull some strings.
Yes, he did. And so Edgar got into West Point. But there, he did not like it so much because it was very strict. Lots of discipline, lots of routines. And so he wanted out. They wouldn't let him out without permission of John Allan. Oh. And John would not give it. So Edgar decided he was going to get kicked out. He stopped attending classes. He just basically did everything he could to get himself dismissed. It worked. He was court-martialed for neglecting duties and disobeying orders. And then he was out.
He's kicked out.
But he's also basically out with John Allan as well.
Yeah.
So they're now basically estranged.
Yeah.
And just as a little spoiler alert, when John died later, he left Edgar nothing in his will, even though he did include he remembered some of his illegitimate children. Here we are. Edgar doesn't know what to do. He decides he's going to see if he can call on some of his other family. His brother Henry, remember, had been in Baltimore with his father's side of the family. So Edgar heads that way, and he ends up...
Because him and Henry are full brothers, right?
They are.
Okay.
But Henry passes away pretty quickly after
this.
Okay.
Yes.
Because Henry passes, he ends up, just Edgar, living in the small home with his widowed Aunt Maria Clem. The documentary pronounced her name Mariah, but it's spelled Maria, so I'm just going to call her Maria.
Okay.
And her young daughter, Virginia, who at this time is 9 years old. So he's living with them. He's got this nice little family, but he's trying different jobs. And sometimes he leaves and goes other places. And at one point, he does take a position as a magazine editor in Richmond. And while he's in Richmond, time has passed, 3 or 4 years have passed. He hears that Virginia has some wealthy relative who's going to send her off to some kind of boarding school or something. And Edgar does not like that because he's afraid he's going to lose Virginia. So he convinces Maria and Virginia that Virginia should become his bride. And
she's like 11 right now, right?
She's 13 now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And they should move to Richmond to join him. They agreed. He is 27. She is 13 years old. She is his first cousin. Now, many will point out that it was a different time back then. A 13-year-old bride was not that unusual.
Which is horrible.
But interestingly, her age was listed as 21 on the marriage certificate because they think it's because back then, if you were under a certain age, you had to get permission from your father.
Right.
But her father was gone.
Right.
And so somebody just lied about it, apparently. Here's another interesting point. A lot of sources, this is a point of disagreement. A lot of sources contain speculation from historians who think that the marriage was more platonic than romantic. Edgar's nickname for Virginia was Sis. She occasionally called him Buddy. And a biographer actually commented on the documentary, quote, "Part of it for Poe was that he'd found a family and he wanted to stay in it for good. Now, that's an opinion. We don't really know what their relationship was like, but based on letters and different descriptions of things, details they wrote in some of their own works, because she wrote a poem about him at one point too, they seemed to adore each other. No matter how tight their money was, Edgar made sure Virginia had luxuries like piano lessons and that her educational needs were met. And there were reports of how this would go against kind of the customs, the etiquette of the time, but she would even like run out excitedly to meet him on the sidewalk when he came home from work sometimes.
It almost sounds like she's his ward.
They would call her the child bride. They always made her seem like she was very innocent and childlike.
Like he didn't want her to go to boarding school, so I'll just do this is my legal way of keeping you here and taking care of you.
And mom came with her. Like mom was living with them pretty much the whole time.
Why not just marry mom then?
Well, I mean, she was his aunt.
Well,
and she's older too.
No, it's
I don't
all
think
icky.
that would have been.
I don't know.
I agree, but yeah, I don't think that would have gone. But sadly, Virginia started showing signs of having contracted tuberculosis when she was only 19. And
This is the point in the movie where she coughs into the handkerchief and there's a spot of blood and we go, oh no.
Right. But it was long and lingering. It would be years before she would actually pass. And this was a big thing for Edgar. He would talk about this in one letter that he wrote to a friend. He talked about the pain of seeing the woman he loved so dearly suffer and how she'd almost died in front of him on several occasions. And this contributed to his drinking because that was something that he struggled with. Alcoholism was an issue for him. A distant relative of his named Hal Poe commented on the documentary that Edgar could go for long spells without drinking, but once it was in front of him, it meant trouble. So a few years prior to Virginia's death, however, Edgar was involved in a big scandal involving a poet named Francis Osgood. Have you heard about this?
I don't think so.
It's not certain whether or not they had an actual physical affair. A lot of people think they did not, but they definitely had a very public flirtation that was very painful to Virginia. Rather than try to tell you about it, I'm just going to read a brief summary from the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore website. Quote, in March 1845, Mrs. Osgood sought out an introduction to Edgar A. Poe, who had reviewed her poetry favorably both in print and in his lecture series on American poetry. In the aftermath of this meeting, the poets acted on their mutual attraction by publishing a series of wistful poems to one another in the pages of the Broadway Journal, a magazine on which Poe then served as an editor and later as sole proprietor. This literary courtship continued through both public and private exchanges until fellow New York author Elizabeth Elliot introduced herself forcefully upon the situation. The results of this episode included not only a termination of the Poe-Osgood romance, but also a falling out between Poe and several members of the New York City literary set.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically, she intervened. She
said, cut this out.
Yeah. Well, she actually, some people think she had a crush on Poe herself and she wanted some attention from him. So she ends up talking to Virginia about this. It was just a whole ugly thing.
A lot of tea was spilled.
Yes. But ultimately in 1847, Virginia died from TB. She again was same age as his mom when she passed 24. And this was while they were living in New York. Edgar was devastated to the point that he could not write for months. And while he kept that cottage in New York until his death, supposedly over the next several years, he just bounced around from town to town along the East Coast. And it was in Providence, Rhode Island that he had his next big romance. Now, he never lived there, but he spent time there in his final years courting the poet Sarah Helen Whitman. So according to the Brown Daily Herald, here's how their romance played out. This is it. This is the one. Okay.
This is the big breakup?
This is the breakup.
Oh, okay.
So in 1848, Providence-based poet Sarah Helen Whitman crafted a tribute to Edgar Allan Poe for a Valentine's Day poetry salon.
So was this a thing? Like you just like flirt with people through the post?
Apparently. And you know what? It was a thing. This was like the big literary time.
Yeah.
They call it this term salon. I think what that means is you would have like this meeting and you would invite all the important literary people there. And it was for a time when he became popular, having Poe at your poetry reading or at this literary event.
It's literally in his name.
Big.
Poetry.
But they would have him come and he would read The Raven, and that was like a thing, you know? So yes, they would publish these very personal poems or works or letters addressed to each other because it was a thing.
They put in the newspaper, do you like me? Check yes or no.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Kinda. You know the woman we were just talking about a second ago, the Frances Osgood? There was a poem he published. Her name is hidden in it. And it basically says that in the poem. Can you find the name? And you have to kind of decode it a little bit. It's like the first letter of this line and then the second letter of that one and then so on. And it says Frances.
I bet Swifties would figure it out pretty fast.
I bet they would. I bet they would. Okay, but to continue this little quote. Although Poe was not present at the salon, Whitman's poem made it into his hands, said Robin Wetherell, Director of Membership and External Relations at the Providence Athenaeum. That's a library.
Okay.
Poe delighted in the poem, and his correspondence with Whitman commenced. They wrote back and forth for months, and eventually Poe did come to Providence to see Whitman and court her, Wetherell said. So here's the thing. He would show up, and the two of them would go visit different places, one of them being this local library called the Providence Athenaeum. And one of the stories they tell is that on one occasion, Sarah even pulled out a book from a shelf in the library to show Edgar this anonymous poem that she loved, and he says, I wrote that. And he pulls out a pencil and he signs it, and that book, which has his signature on it, is still in this library's special collections.
That's cool.
Yes.
He said Exo Edgar.
Yes. So the thing is, Edgar was ready to take their relationship to the next level, but Sarah was reluctant because she was almost 10 years older than him. Now, reportedly, he did go for talented women. It seemed like he was attracted to writers after he lost Virginia, but even Virginia wrote a few things. All this to say, she was supposed to be beautiful and talented, and he pursued her hard. But she wrote to him at one point saying, I can only say to you that had I youth and health and beauty, I would live for you and die with you. Now, were I allow myself to love you, I could only enjoy a bright, brief hour of rapture and die.
Oh, dear.
I know. But the other complication was that her family did not like Edgar, especially her mother. So he continued to pursue, finally won her over. They got engaged. He reportedly proposed to her in a local cemetery.
Oh, dear.
And she accepted on the condition that he stopped drinking alcohol. They set their wedding date for Christmas Day. But the story goes that on December 23rd, 2 days before the wedding, while they were at this same library, somebody gave Sarah this little communication, this note, and it said that Poe had broken his promise to her that he had been seen drinking. And she immediately called off the wedding. And
she didn't even talk to him first?
Well, I think they were together at the time.
Oh,
but
okay,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. And they never saw each other again, although people say that she still cared for him and that after he passed, which is not very long after this, by the way, she would be one of his defenders because remember, people would say things about him that were not kind.
Yeah.
And she was one who really tried to defend his legacy and secure his position as this literary genius. Also, just as a little side note, in her later years, she apparently got into spiritualism. And there is a photo of her serving as a medium that is about the creepiest thing. And
Really?
I'm putting it in my show notes.
Okay.
Because you will enjoy it. No, you won't.
No, I won't. I was like, what are you saying? No.
It was also while he was engaged to her that probably the most famous portrait of Edgar Allan Poe was actually taken. It was meant to be an engagement gift for Sarah. People call it by a few different names, but one of them is the Whitman daguerreotype, and she kept that for decades.
See, and she said she was in ill health and she was going to die soon, and here she lives for decades after he's
I
gone.
think she was being poetic. I think she was
Okay.
basically saying, I'm 10 years older.
Okay.
I'm going to pass so
Okay.
much sooner. We wouldn't have much time together
Okay.
because I'm so much older. I think that's
Well,
what she's saying.
She was wrong.
She was wrong. But she kept it for decades, and a few years before her death, she gave it to a trusted friend. That friend passed the photo to a few other people, and it finally ended up in the John Hay Library in Brown University, along with what is supposed to be a lock of hair that Edgar gave to Sarah, because that was a romantic
thing.
gesture
That was
back
a
then.
thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So not long after things went awry with Sarah, Edgar reconnected with the old childhood sweetheart, Elmira.
Elmira.
Remember her?
Yes.
So she has since been married and then become a widow. So the two of them, they don't have dad standing in the way anymore.
No, that's true.
No. So they become engaged. He is 40, she is 39.
Okay.
And an artifact given to the Poe Museum by this historian, somebody who knows a lot about Poe, this woman named Susan Taine, is a gold ring that has the name Edgar engraved on the inside, and this supposedly is the ring that he gave to Elmira. They were set to be married, but tragically he died mysteriously
Very
10
mysteriously.
days before their wedding dates. He was on his way to pick up his Aunt Maria Clem for the wedding when he disappeared.
I know, disappeared, fully disappeared, like whoop.
And then he shows up.
Yep.
And then he dies.
Yep.
We're going to come back to this. We're not going to say any
Shoot.
more.
It's so cool.
It's a very interesting story. So there were probably a few women I missed, but I tried to hit
When did
the
he have time to
main
write?
ones.
Edgar.
That's something actually that came up. This man had no life because he dedicated himself so much to his literary work, his magazine editor duties, his literary criticism, trying to write his own stuff, and then have something of a family life
Yeah.
too. Like, he drove himself into the ground.
Armchair psychologist.
But anyway, I think this brings us to our armchair. Ooh, so what are your thoughts about the significance of women or the loss thereof?
Well, it sounds
for
like
Edgar?
Like you're right. It sounds like that drove him as far as loss and death and horror. He had been through a lot. I don't forgive him for the cat story, though. I don't. No, there's no need for that. No call for that. But yeah, he is just a fascinating, complex, interesting person. And I just don't know. They don't make them like him now, which could be good or bad. I don't know.
They don't. Yeah. I'm tempted to want to talk about him as the artist, the writer, but I'm going to go
Let's
over
keep it
here.
to the ladies.
I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say I feel like he was seeking a mother and he was
Yes.
seeking a family his entire life.
Yes.
I think that his childhood, his experience losing his mother, never getting to know her, and then not feeling secure in the Allen household.
Yeah.
Even though I think Francis loved on him, but I bet you it still never felt secure. It probably felt like, okay, she's over here supporting me, but on the other hand, here's John. So I feel like that was just this incredible motivator for him.
That movie I talked about at the top, I think it's called The Pale Blue Eye. Did you watch that on
I did
Netflix?
not.
Oh, it's fantastic. I truly, truly liked it. And it made me, I know it's historical fiction. Christian Bale is in it, but the person who played Poe, man, he just really grabbed my heart and made me feel for him and gave me a different perspective, like made him more of a person to me rather than the scary stuff that he had always written. So
Yeah.
I recommend that film on Netflix. But it also has a woman, I believe she is fictional, that he falls in love with and the complications of that relationship.
Yeah, we'll have to check that out.
Definitely.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of not only this episode, but of our entire month. And the theme, breaking up is hard to do. I mean, obviously there's some sad elements to it, but it's been fascinating.
It has been.
Yeah,
it's
been
always
very
fascinating.
interesting.
Good conversation.
Yeah. Well, who are we going to cheers, Ashley?
Well, let's cheers our three E-boys, the Everly Brothers and Edgar Allan Poe.
Cheers to you, fellas.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown.
That's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.